Hello and welcome to Maiden, Mother, Matriarch. My guest today is Kate Phelan, a lecturer in the School of Global, Urban and Social Studies at RMIT University in Melbourne and the author of a new book titled Feminism Defeated. We spoke about how feminism has changed over the last half century, from the radicalism, the second wave, to the absorption of feminism into the progressive omnicause. In the extended version of the episode, we also spoke about my personality theory of feminist history, particularly the role of female agreeableness in defanging the women's movement. Plus, we discussed Catharine MacKinnon's classic essay, What is a White Woman Anyway?, and debated why feminism ought to exist at all. While you can, of course, listen to MMM wherever you get your podcasts, the true home of the podcast is to be found at louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can find not only the extended version of this episode, but also the extended versions of hundreds of MMM podcasts, plus the weekly bonus episodes I record with other Substackers and the MMM chat community. This is a listener-supported podcast. I am utterly reliant on paid subscribers to produce the show and keep the lights on. If you find Maiden, Mother, Matriarch valuable, the most helpful possible thing that you can do is to sign up for a paid subscription at louiseperry.substack.com. Thank you. Kate, should we start by talking about the distinction that you draw between political feminism and social feminism?
Okay. Well, I think I associate political feminism with second wave feminism, which thought about the groupings men and women in terms of class or power. They thought about men and women as groups that were hierarchically arranged, men as being the sort of master category, if you like, women as being the subject category. Whereas social feminism, which is how I talk about contemporary feminism, I guess you could trace that back. Well, you could trace it back to Wollstonecraft, I suppose, but, paradigmatically to Beauvoir. That is the feminism that is concerned with the groupings men and women more as genders or as constructs. And I think so for them, the salient feature of men and women is that they're constructed, contingent, artificial. Whereas for political feminism, the salient feature is power and powerlessness.
Maybe we should steelman the social feminist view before we proceed to trash it. So this is the view associated with, say, Judith Butler, kind of emerges particularly in the 1990s, although, as you say, it has an older heritage than that.
Yeah.
What's this kind of strongest version of their argument?
Okay, well, so, yeah, interesting. I guess I would have said the strongest version was maybe the older one, in the sense that what made it strong was that it was needed in that historical moment. So if I think about Wollstonecraft and Beauvoir, they were writing in a context in which women's natures really were invoked as the reason that women couldn't or shouldn't be allowed to try and do certain things, why they couldn't have certain jobs or couldn't study certain things, or so it was really the beliefs about women's natures were really the thing that were limiting women. So then it mattered to say perhaps so much of what we think of as women's nature is the result of socialization.
The radical feminists of the second wave, they also believe in socialization thesis, right? So they also think that it's that gendered behaviors are overwhelmingly, if not exclusively, a product of experience, not of innate nature.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe the difference is, like, I guess they were asking sort of to what end or in whose interest. Right. So both men and women are socialized into certain roles. But I guess they asked, like, what are the roles and whose interests do they serve? And they thought they serve men's interests and not women's.
Whereas I guess the social feminists, they do also think that there's a hierarchy between men and women and masculinity and femininity. Like, they still have that fundamentally feminist view of the world.
Yeah.
I guess they just think that the link between biology and those social roles is much flimsier than radical feminists.
Yeah, and so maybe that's where we need to start making some distinctions between some of the social feminists. Someone like, I think, Wollstonecraft and Beauvoir, think still they thought about female people as being socialized into femininity, or for Beauvoir maybe womanhood, whereas someone like Butler is questioning like the content of femaleness. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'd say that Butler shares the second wave or the radical feminist view of men and women as power relations.
Well, she sees, it's been a long time since I read Butler, and it was obviously incredibly painful to do so because her prose is so famously bad. But my memory of reading it was that she is smarter than her acolytes. And so the argument that she makes is more defensible than the kind of pop version of it that has been developed. Like, she has this famous bit where she talks about going to the wardrobe of gender and like picking out your gender for the day or something. And this has often been interpreted by her fans as like, yeah, you can just be whatever you want to be. How amazing, how creative and liberating. Whereas I think that the way that she is representing this is actually as like a fantasy that can never be realized. I think that she doesn't see it as something that's actually available to us, that we could be that free to choose our gender presentations.
No, yes, and I think the idea of gender as performance is not like, for her, it's not the thin one that it is in, I think, popular discourse. It's not just an outfit. But I guess she's operating in the sort of post-structuralist tradition. So I do think, unlike the second wave or the radical feminists, they really thought sort of men had power over women. Butler thinks she has a different view of power, right? She thinks about power as being the thing that is making who men and women are. Yeah, for her, I think that for her, the casualties of patriarchy are different. I think she thinks the casualties are the people who don't fall within. They're the people who don't fall within the man-woman categories, right?
Yeah, the gender non-conforming. Yeah,
exactly. For second wave feminism, the casualties are women. So I do think they have very different worldviews.
Yeah, I think that's true. And therefore that, I guess, the project of butlerian feminism is to disrupt those categories, sort of show solidarity with these gender minorities.
Yeah, get intelligibility and recognition for these like excluded or unintelligible sort of.
Yeah, and to do all this gender play like drag and whatever in order to try and, I guess, confuse the signals and therefore make it more difficult to persecute gender minorities. Is that the project?
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, I have to admit, on the one hand, I can see that the trans inclusionary project or the gender diversity project makes sense from Butler's perspective. And then on the other hand, I'm still not sure that it's totally coherent or
And this was a question I had planned to ask, which is, you make a great deal of admirable effort to understand this trans inclusive feminism on its own terms and to sort of establish a coherent philosophy that they hold to. And I just wonder if it isn't very coherent.
Yeah.
And the reason it isn't very coherent is because it's almost not supposed to be. It's like again, I don't want to impugn Judith Butler specifically because she's actually very clever. And I think it's always the curse of popular intellectuals that their thesis will become degraded over time, will become like a caricature of itself, right? So I don't want to direct this. Well, I don't want to direct this at her specifically, but I think that this wave of feminists have taken elements from previous waves, like the second wave. They do at least often use the vocabulary of the second wave and some of the ideas of the second wave.
Yeah, and certainly some trans inclusionary feminists, or like Catharine MacKinnon and Laurie Watson do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, Catharine MacKinnon is a good example of someone who's actually very critical of Judith Butler while also being trans inclusive. So there's diversity within this.
Yeah.
But I sort of think that what they do is they just tack on ideas which make it possible to include trans people, and the reason in the woman category, and the reason they want to do that is more to do with wanting to be kind and wanting to be subversive of traditional norms more than anything actually intellectually consistent. And I first thought this when are you familiar with Amir Srinivasan?
Yeah.
She's a philosopher.
The Right to Sex.
Right to Sex was her big book, and she also has written for the London Review of Books and other kind of public-facing places as well as in academia. And I went to a talk that she gave like 10 years ago, ages ago, when I was, because she was teaching at Oxford. I think she still is, and I was a student there. And she gave a talk about like the history of feminist theory. And it was really good. Yeah. She's really smart. Yeah. And the whole, the first 45 minutes or something of this hour-long lecture was this really cogent history.
Yeah, and she seems to really have done her reading.
Yeah, right. And I was like, wow, this is great. And then she got to the end, she got to, the last segment of the lecture, and she said, this is word for word because I remember this exactly. She said, but given that trans women are women.
Yeah.
And then she basically tore up everything that she'd said and kind of, and have essentially tacked on philosophically, okay, but given that trans women are women, and that is a fact.
Yeah.
How do we manage this? And I thought,
yeah,
man, like this is a really, this was great philosophy right up until it was terrible philosophy.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that's largely what's going on. It actually isn't to do with different priors necessarily to radical feminists. It's got more to do with political expediency. What do you think?
Yeah. I suppose then I wonder why it is that those feminists wanted to accommodate trans women or the whole trans inclusionary project like under the banner of feminism. Or you think that was just the impulse was just
why not have it as a separate thing?
Yeah. Why not say those people need a politics and a movement, sure, but it's not, and it's in fact incompatible with the feminist one.
I suppose because trans-identified people have a very clear and demanding ask, which is we want you to say, and not even just we want you to say that we are kind of neo-women or we are socially women but biologically male or whatever it is. They're like, a lot of them are really insistent, no, we are biologically female. We have always been biologically female. That it's a very, they ask a lot. And I guess the choice that faces feminists is, do you say, sorry, no?
Yeah.
Or do you accommodate this demand and in doing so have to sort of rewrite your philosophy? And a lot of them have chosen the latter option.
Yes. But does that show that they never really did believe the radical feminist philosophy?
Maybe.
Like if you can't choose women's interests in the crucial moment, what does that say?
Well, a lot of them would deny the idea that there is a conflict between women's interests.
Yeah. And that has a history, I think, or legacy in earlier feminism too. I think, or that impulse to deny conflicts of interest. The radical feminists too said everyone will be better, or some of them at least, everyone will be better off from women's liberation. Women's liberation will set everyone free. This is the idea of intersectionality, right? You can evade politics.
Yeah, and also that there are lots of other examples from the second wave. I interviewed Phyllis Chesler recently,
right?
Who you may know as the leading second wave writer, and who wrote particularly on psychiatry, and she's very upfront about the dysfunctions within the second wave and the ways in which women betrayed each other and there's quite like severe social pathology that went on, and there are loads of examples that she's written about of second wave feminists betraying their principles. One of the most famous is probably Gloria Steinem backing Bill Clinton when he was accused of all sorts of sexual violence and misbehavior, because it was more important to back the Democrats.
Right, I was going to ask, was that just so she was choosing the left, or?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, this is one example, but there have been loads of these. So this isn't unique to the current moment. This has always been a problem.
Yeah. What, is this just the current incarnation of it, or is it more devastating? I tend to think of it as somehow qualitatively different.
Yeah. Yes, because it demands a more fundamental rethink
Yeah.
of the principles.
You just can't retain the idea of women as a class. You can't talk about women's history of subjection or oppression. You can't talk about women's liberation, I don't
Yeah.
think. Whereas maybe
Yeah.
you could until this sort of this compromise or
Yeah, I think that's true. I tend to think that the a kind of underappreciated factor in transgenderism entering the political scene and becoming so, I would say, I think you would say too, catastrophic in terms of
yeah.
its effect on the academy and on feminism in particular, is the medical science factor. It's that you couldn't convincingly make a man look female until really recently. And not just through surgeries, but also through all the hormone stuff. Like,
Yeah.
yes, I know they say, oh, we've had trans people for millennia, blah blah blah,
Yeah.
but it's different because in previous eras and in other cultures, it's more like kind of effete gay men dressing in feminine clothes, but no one thinks that they're not male, and they can't
Yeah.
actually, like, they can't even like laser their beards or whatever. I mean, they're
Yeah.
really stuck in terms of their ability to change their appearance. Whereas from the 1990s onwards, we suddenly basically have a technology shock where it does become possible to
Yeah.
create like Jazz Jennings, who
Yeah.
looks really female. And I wonder if that actually is sort of the big thing that happens. And then feminists all of a sudden are confronted with these very female looking people. Some of them, obviously loads of trans people don't really pass at all, but
Well,
some of them do.
yeah.
And they're like, do we say no? Like, you're not welcome here. This doesn't work with this isn't intellectually sound. Like, good luck, but you're not a woman.
Yeah. That's interesting. I guess I feel like there are I don't know, that those cases are really the minority.
Yeah, they are, but they're high profile minority, like Laverne Cox,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
in Britain,
Yeah.
someone like Paris Lees. Like, there are examples of, they're not the autogynophiles, right? These are
Yeah.
in Blanchard's typology, the homosexual transsexuals. But
Yeah.
they do sometimes pass really well, and they've been given a lot of cultural prominence by
Yeah.
virtue of that.
I wonder, I think like Holly Lawford Smith has said that it really, like, maybe what accounts, or in part, for like the disagreement is the different paradigm cases that we're taking.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe it's that I'm taking that maybe my paradigm case are the men who really unconvincingly pass,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe for others the paradigm case are the men who more convincingly pass. Or
I
maybe
think that's true.
sometimes I think too, it's for some feminists like Catharine MacKinnon, maybe it's that the paradigm cases are the, I think MacKinnon worked with trans women in prostitution early on, and so maybe for her the paradigm cases are trans women who have suffered, what women have suffered. And then I think I can see how you might want to bring them into, or say that they are members of the political class.
Yeah.
Even though I think that is I think that's mistaken. I don't think they're suffering what they're suffering, like, on the basis of their bodies, their sex.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that is true. And I also think that partly explains why the public have moved on this. At least certainly in Britain. I don't know if this has happened so much in Australia yet, but
Not so much,
the public, it'll happen, I promise.
Yeah, good.
But
Thanks.
what's happened in Britain is that, and you can see this in polling, that people used to be pretty sympathetic to transgenderism, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and thought, oh, I think that the paradigmatic example that they had in mind was basically the very gender non-conforming gay man who passed well, and wasn't doing it because it was a fetish or anything like that, was doing it because of a deep sense of, I think gender dysphoria is an accurate way of describing it. I think that is a real sensation.
Yeah.
Whereas I think, and those kind of cases were really foregrounded in popular culture, and including in TV and film and so on. And then now I think that the trans movement has become more visible and more vocal. And also I think there genuinely has been a shift in the trans population towards it becoming more autogynephilic, like the proportion of, I think Ray Blanchard has suggested this, that actually the proportion of people now identifying as trans who are doing it because they're autogynephiles is higher than it was, maybe because it's become more socially acceptable.
Yeah. But you think the public is attentive to this?
I think the public have started encountering those examples more frequently, not necessarily in their day-to-day lives, but in TV and social media and so on, and think, oh, and in what I mean, a very important case here was, I forget his name now, but there was a particular trans sex offender who was housed in a women's prison, and it was a whole political drama. There have actually been multiple cases of this, but I'm thinking of one specifically that I think was in Scotland, and you ended up with photos of this person, like unfiltered photos, where this person is just obviously kind of a creepy man.
Yeah.
And that was all over the news. And I think that probably has had I think that's probably the most important thing actually in moving the dial in terms of public opinion, combined also with trans activists being increasingly crazy and kind of vocally demanding
and aggressive and belligerent,
unreasonable.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, what if I suppose I've thought that part of why people have been so willing to accommodate trans women is that they haven't recognized women as a political group. And so do you think that there's also more recognition of that or not?
I don't think people do instinctively recognize women as a political group,
or as a
including
group
women.
with a history of oppression.
I don't think people instinctively think that, no. I think the reason why you so often get these problems in feminism where people, including feminists, choose their other identities over their female identity, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to ethnicity.
Yeah.
Is because people have an instinctive sense of allegiance to their ethnic group. Not all the time, but like particularly that's uncommon in weird cultures, right?
Yeah.
To feel that very strongly, to be ethnocentric. But most people are pretty ethnocentric as an instinct. Whereas I don't think that most women feel a sense of camaraderie or
loyalty
to other women. No, not really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if anything, women tend to be quite like fractious.
Yes.
With each other.
Yeah, I agree. And I think women are encouraged to be loyal to men and to identify their interests with men's interests, and they've also been dispersed among, like, there are so many good reasons for that lack of loyalty or solidarity, I think. But I suppose I was just wondering whether there is more recognition of that now, and more of an awareness or an understanding that when men are demanding recognition as women, they are demanding recognition as members of an historically oppressed group.
Well, that's certainly the argument that gender critical activists have put forward, and like with considerable success, and to some extent maybe at least in Britain.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if in some ways this has been sort of useful for feminism in terms of forcing that reiteration of this idea.
Of bringing it back into view.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But I think it's always quite hard work to convince everyone of this view.
To articulate it even.
Yeah. It might well be true, and I think it is. I think that women do have a lot of shared political interests, but it's not something that people tend to emotionally assume.
Yeah.
Which is hard work.
Yeah.
If you're
the feminist which is the feminist project.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I guess the feminist project, I was actually, just because I interviewed Holly Lawford Smith, whose name you just raised recently, about her book, and we were talking about basically whether it's possible to have right-wing forms of feminism, or whether various political movements or political actors that might not call themselves feminists actually should be understood in that way. So like Phyllis Chesler sorry, not Phyllis Chesler. We've already talked about her.
Oh, yes.
Phyllis Schlafly.
Yeah.
Is a great example of this because she's a 1970s American activist, for listeners who don't know, who campaigned against the Equal Rights Amendment and campaigned very much against the second wave. So her argument was that treating men and women as equal in law would actually be disadvantageous for women. Her primary example being that women would be subjected to the draft, and this was at the time of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So that if you treated men and women the same, then women would be drafted into battle, and this was obviously kind of morally repugnant. The idea of girls in foxholes was her expression, and therefore that we needed women ought to reject the egalitarian frame.
Yeah.
And she was very successful, and the Equal Rights Amendment was not passed, and she got a lot of women, like housewife kind of women, to rally behind her cause. And Holly insists, Phyllis Schlafly might not call herself a feminist, but she is, because she's arguing she's arguing on behalf of women qua
She's
women.
representing women's interests.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But sometimes I think the people who can be most effective activists, going back to this question about are women instinctively allied with one another, answer no. Sometimes the most effective activists on one particular cause, I guess, get around that in some way. Like, you can still be effective in pushing for women's political interests, but maybe coming at it slightly sideways is more effective. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, setting aside the question of effectiveness, I wonder, is it enough to represent women's interests, or does there have to be some particular content to women's interests for it to be feminist? Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm convinced. I guess, okay, so I'm thinking about how some of the, MacKinnon talks about how women have been also socialized in their minds, right, to identify their interests with men's interests. So then I feel like it can't be the case that feminism can just be representation of women in the sense of like actually existing women, what they claim their interests to be.
So you mean that just straightforwardly saying this is what women are asking for is insufficient?
Yeah. Or I'm just wondering, I mean, how, that might not get you any changes to the status quo, and then can it be called feminist?
Yeah. I mean, Holly says yes. Yeah. But obviously
I'll have to talk to Holly about this.
You can honestly dispute this, because if, say, you get together a group of women who say, no, actually, we think that patriarchy is marvelous for whatever reason.
Yeah.
There will be other groups of women who sincerely disagree.
Yeah.
And
what's the question? Is feminism just like the democratic outcome for women? I don't know that it is.
Yeah. Like, if you got together a bunch of women whose sons had been accused of rape, and these women said, this is a kind of extreme example, but these women were like, we as mothers object to the legal action being taken against our sons. I think that would not hold up as a feminist cause.
Yeah.
Even if they were organizing on the basis of all being women and mothers and sharing that identity along with their relationship to their sons.
Yeah. I can also see, of course, you do get into, you don't want feminism to be so far away from actual women. I think actual women should feel that feminism represents their interests. So then I suppose it's the job of, if feminists conceive of women's interests differently from actual women, then I think it's the job of feminism to convince them.
Yeah. I'm sure you're aware of all these polls asking women, do you identify as a feminist? And overwhelmingly they say no.
Oh, really?
It's always very, very... The polling response tends to be very negative.
Yeah.
But then if you ask... I mean, I think to some extent the problem we've had, and this isn't unique to now, I think this is a long-standing problem, is that there's a kind of Mott and Bailey with feminism. And so the Mott is stuff that actually everyone basically agrees on, like wives shouldn't be the chattel of their husbands. Women should have access to domestic violence refuges and the support of the law against abusive husbands or other family members. Women should be able to vote, that kind of stuff. Right now in 2025, Britain and Australia is not at all controversial. The problem is that, and if that's how we were defining feminism, with some, like, admittedly, in other times and places, those would be really radical things to say, right? If that's how we were defining feminism, I think everyone would be on board. The problem is that the Bailey is pretty crazy.
What's the Bailey?
The less defensible version would include things like, well, obviously the trans-inclusive feminism, men and women don't really exist. That's the most crazy version. I mean, the sort of thing that people are not necessarily convinced on, I think most people, is the idea that sort of women are everywhere and always secondary to men, that women are never privileged in any area, that in every way men are. Because what people always point to is say, but men do really difficult, dangerous jobs that women don't have to do. Men are drafted into war, whereas women aren't. There are men are more likely to be homeless and to commit suicide and all stuff. So I think people sometimes hear the Bailey versions of feminism as saying men don't suffer. Or men are always preferred over women in every instance. And there are obviously examples where that isn't true.
But that's interesting. So you think that part of what's going on, people or women don't identify as feminist, is that they're saying the feminist project is pretty well done. There's no need for it now. Something like that.
I suppose they'd say that that Mott feminism is done and dusted. And Bailey feminism is unattractive. And Bailey feminism is unattractive. So they're not into it. I mean, presumably a lot of people who are answering polls on whether they identify as feminist don't really know.
Or don't have a clear picture in mind of,
I guess they know that women's suffrage was achieved like 100 years ago. Maybe they don't. I don't know. I mean, I'm always amazed by actually how little the general public know about history and politics.
And I guess I sort of, I feel, I don't know, a little bewildered, because it also seems like everyone is calling themselves a feminist.
Oh, well, in some social circles. I think it's become very, I think that calling yourself a feminist among students, say, or on the political left in general.
I guess it's just another signal that you're progressive.
Basically, it's part of the bundle. Even if actually you will like constantly choose every other progressive cause over women, opportunity that presents itself. Which is also very voguish.
I guess I've said to think that the problem is that everyone calling themselves a feminist, not the problem of no one identifying with feminism. In fact, maybe the latter is almost some form of progress. I don't know.
It does seem as if feminism becoming part of the bundle of progressive causes has done a lot of harm to feminism. that it's coincided with it being degraded in the way that you write about.
Or that was the cost of feminism's inclusion in the left. So long as feminism didn't represent women's interests, or didn't represent women's interests when they conflicted with men's, it would be accepted.
Yes, and conflicted with men's turns out to be a lot of cases. That's very
exactly
expensive.
Right.
It's very interesting reading second wave accounts of leftist opposition to the women's movement.
I agree. It's like we've forgotten about that.
And the fact that the women's movement emerged quite a lot later than the New Left. There's a good decade or something. Where you have civil rights movement in America and you have all this other leftist agitating and thinking happening. And women are kind of on the outskirts of it, and as we now know, feeling very aggrieved because there's a lot of sexism and terrible male behaviour.
The women's movement emerged really from disenchantment. It was precipitated disenchantment with the left. I think, women decided we have to go our own way. Got to form our own movement. whether for sort of pragmatic or philosophical reasons, because I suppose there's that question, right? Like, was it, I guess, as you were just suggesting, was it just the case that the left had sexists in it, or is it the case that the left is intrinsically or necessarily sexist? And I think the second wave feminists oscillated. But yeah. Whatever their view, though, they thought we have to have our own separate movement.
You know, I wonder if and then I think what happens, as you've described, is that there's this brief period where the women's movement is quite independent of the left.
Yeah.
And then it gets reabsorbed.
Yeah.
And it becomes part of the bundle of progressive omnicauses. And basically, whenever feminism encounters conflict of interest with men, it folds, is what we're currently seeing, with the exception obviously of like gender critical branch, which is separate, but in terms of within the bosom of the progressive left, feminism is very, I mean, feminism folds on everything from like porn to prostitution to like there's no degradation that will not be embraced by progressive feminists.
I'm noticing a shift even in the analysis of domestic violence, you know, like
really
popular feminists in Australia are just starting to encourage everyone to think about domestic violence as a result of trauma that men have suffered in childhood. And
really?
I guess whatever you think about that analysis, the point is just it's dramatically different from the second wave analysis, which was that it's, you know, violence is not something that broken men do. It's something that men as men socialized under patriarchy do.
Are they doing that in Australia because is it to do with race? Because that's often the classic way in which feminism folds when it confronts. Is it to do with, say, domestic violence in Aboriginal communities or something?
No, just across the board.
Really?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's much more palatable, right? I think you don't hurt men's feelings when you offer that analysis. And I don't know if they just, I mean, how I get how it's often framed is, well, you know, the feminist efforts around domestic violence haven't succeeded. Therefore, the feminist analysis must be incorrect.
Feminist efforts on domestic violence have, like, it's one of the few success stories, actually, like in the sense that it really was the case not so long ago that the refuges did not exist, and police really would encounter a woman with a black eye and just do nothing, you know, because her husband was locally respected or whatever. I mean, I think actually that's one of the best examples of feminism being effective, the second wave being effective.
I guess it depends what you're measuring. Like, are you measuring the rates of violence, or are you measuring sort of mechanisms to like support women through it? Or
that's true. It's hard to measure inherently. It's a difficult thing to. The same is true of sexual violence. Like, it's some of the most difficult type of crime to record because of the private nature of it and the fact that it's subjective. So my theory about this, which I haven't explored for some time, but I've just been reminded that I think this is part of what's going on, to do with personality, is to do with if you read about or speak to the women who were involved in the second wave, they're often really unusual people in terms of personality.
But eccentric,
I say this. Mean? They're eccentric, but not just that. They tend to be very clever. Kind of goes without saying, because they're intellectuals overwhelmingly, right? They're very disagreeable and are happy to often pay. Well, not happy to, but they often paid a very heavy social cost for their beliefs.
Yeah.
So they would break with their husbands, like be ostracized by their families, ostracized by friends, would basically just go and live with these other women. They would choose ideology over these social relationships often. They were very, I mean, something that Phyllis Chesler writes about actually is like high rates of mental illness, like serious mental illness among many of the most famous second wave women, and generally a sort of creative, I mean, this kind of mental illness that she talks about, like bipolar and psychosis, it does often go along with being very, very creative and
a visionary. And
exactly, and being quite psychologically strange in good ways and bad. I wonder if to some extent, when the women's movement was basically composed of, to put it I don't mean this meanly, but weirdos.
Yeah.
When it was like a really marginal and very passionate group who were happy to pick fights with the rest of the left and were genuine and were very psychologically unusual, it was able to preserve this very distinctive way of viewing the world,
and its independence.
Exactly, and particularly against the broader left.
That's really interesting.
Whereas now that feminism has, I mean, as you were saying, like everyone in the academy or within any kind of vaguely leftist institution will say that they're a feminist, but it kind of doesn't have any content. And I think that when feminism has become, basically feminism has been undone by its own success. So it became a high status thing to be. And as soon as it was a high status thing to be, everyone rushed in and adopted it as a label. But the thing is that most people aren't actually capable of having that kind of psychological independence that the early women's movement demonstrated. And particularly women. I mean, whether or not you think this is innate or socialized, it might be both.
Yeah.
Women are agreeable.
Yeah.
And women are will often just bow to like confident men that they encounter and will prioritize being nice over being truthful. And I think basically that when feminism becomes a movement of just normal women, like psychologically normal women,
it's destined to fail.
Will inevitably, I think so.
No, that's a really interesting analysis. I mean, I tend to say, and I sound a little even mean, I don't mean in a bad, but I think crazy can be good. But the feminism or the second wave feminism or radical feminism, it is crazy. In that I think they were talking, or they were trying to bring into being a new language, really. You know, they talked about, you know, thinking about like Ty Grace Atkinson talking about men being the enemy and drawing up diagrams of the battlefield. And I think Richard Rorty has this nice phrase about how the prophet in the moment is indistinguishable from the lunatic.
Yeah.
And I think feminists or radical feminists are the prophet / lunatics. So then there is, I just think that's really compatible with your analysis. But then there is this question of, okay, so how do you build the movement? Because it does seem like, so what? To bring women in, you've got to make it reasonable. But the reasonable version of feminism is then not really feminism. It's intersectionality, or it's leftism, or or it's domestic violence is the result of men's trauma or something like that.
It ends up being neutered,
Yeah.
This is not the end of the episode. Actually, we're only halfway through, but the rest of the show is behind a paywall. In the extended version of the episode, Kate and I spoke about my personality theory of feminist history, particularly the role of female agreeableness in defanging the women's movement. Plus, we discussed Catharine MacKinnon's classic essay, What is a White Woman Anyway?, and debated why feminism ought to exist at all. While you can, of course, listen to MMM wherever you get your podcasts, the true home of the podcast is to be found at louiseperry.substack.com. That's where you can find not only the extended version of this episode, but also the extended version of hundreds of MMM podcasts, plus the weekly bonus episodes I record with other Substackers and the MMM chat community. This is a listener-supported podcast. I am utterly reliant on paid subscribers to produce the show and keep the lights on. If you find Maiden Mother Matriarch valuable, the most helpful possible thing that you can do is to sign up for a paid subscription at louiseperry.substack.com. Thank you.